Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, caro Rettore Francesco Frati, distinguished Professor Brian McGuinness. In a man's life, there are sometimes special moments. Today, there is such an exceptional moment. On the one side, for a most worthy scholar, that is, for Professor Brian McGuinness, and on the other hand, also for the Leopold Franzens University of Innsbruck. I have the pleasure, as the rector of the Leopold Franzens University of Innsbruck, and as a representative for our honorary selection committee, to bestow upon Professor Bernhard Francis McGuinness the most prestigious award a university can hand over to a scientific scholar, that is, an honorary doctorate degree of the Leopold Franzens Universität Innsbruck. To this means, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you very much for joining us today for this special ceremony. In particular, I would like to welcome Brian McGuinness and Giovanna Corsi McGuinness, members of his family, colleagues, friends, and former students, some of those I have already met, representatives of the University of Siena and Innsbruck, including from Siena, Rettore Professor Francesco Frati, Professor Marco Pedalli, Dipartimento di Filosofia, Siena, and from Innsbruck, Vice Rector Anke Bockreis, Vice Rector Ulrike Danzer, Vice Rector Bernhard Fügenschuh, Dean of the Faculty for Humanities Sebastian Donat, Chairman of the Department of Philosophy Peter Kügler, Head of the Italian Studies Center Francesca Bagaccia, and Head of our Communication Center Uwe Strieger. Excellent education at the university level has to be based on leading-edge research. That is our belief. It is therefore important for any ambitious university to attract as collaborators, if possible, leading research authorities. Austria, its universities, and in particular the Forschungsinstitut Brenner Archiv of the Leopold Franzens University in Innsbruck, have had the fortune that such a renowned scholar, Professor Brian McGuinness, has collaborated over many years with colleagues from Innsbruck. Brian McGuinness, born in Wales and educated at Balliol College, Oxford, worked for 35 years at Queen's College, Oxford. From 1982 to 2002, he was also professor of the history of scientific thought at the Università degli Studi of Siena in Italy. And today, on the occasion, practically, of his 90th birthday, an entourage from the University of Innsbruck has come to Siena to honor him accordingly. Professor Bernhard Francis McGuinness is one of the world's foremost authority on the life and work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, Austria's most illustrious philosopher in the 20th century. Professor McGuinness's biography of the young Wittgenstein, his numerous essays on all aspects of Wittgenstein's life and thought, his editions of Wittgenstein's letters and writings are all indices of his preeminence in Wittgenstein studies. His works have set the standards in this field. In his efforts to get clear about Wittgenstein's philosophical background in a scholarly way, he has even edited translations of the works of Ludwig Boltzmann and Ernst Mach, and as a physicist myself, I can say that these editions have proven useful to the scholarly community far beyond the confines of Wittgenstein's scholarship. In short, Professor McGuinness has left no stone unturned in his efforts to explain the genesis and significance of Wittgenstein's life and philosophy. In all of these efforts, his service to Austrian culture has been inestimable in areas as different as family history and the history of science, or the history of logic and the history of religion. Thus, it should not be surprising to us that Professor McGuinness was appointed honorary professor, honorar professor of philosophy at the University of Graz, and that I myself had the honor some years ago in the name of the Austrian Federal Minister of Education, Science and Culture to bestow to Professor Brian McGuinness the Ehrenkreuz für Wissenschaft und Kunst erste Klasse, the Honorary Cross for Science and Art First Class. In all discussions, public and private, he has championed the highest standards of empirical investigation and criticized idle speculation rigorously and constructively. All of Professor McGuinness' scholarly efforts have been characterized by patient, painstaking accuracy, crystal clarity, and philosophical acumen. He has been unfailingly helpful to younger scholars in the field, drawing upon his long experience as an Oxford tutor in assisting them to make the best out their research undertakings. In ending this, I might add that the Brenner Archives Research Institute in Innsbruck has been especially fortunate in winning his collaboration in its various Wittgenstein-related projects. Professor McGuinness has contributed generously, on the one hand in form of advice and editorial knowledge, and on the other hand from his extensive collection of Wittgensteiniana, without which these projects could scarcely have been carried to conclusion. Finally, important parts of Professor McGuinness' collection are now in the hands of the Brenner Archiv. Having summarized these facts, it is clear that they demand the unique recognition of the Leopold-Franzens-Universität in the form of the highest decoration for scholarship that our university can confer. Before we proceed in a minute with the honorary degree ceremony, I would like to ask two colleagues, Professor Allan Janik and Professor Josef Mitterer, to give their view of the achievements towards a deeper understanding of Austrian philosophy and culture by Brian McGuinness. I know that at least one of them has been asked by Brian not to exaggerate too much. This will not happen. I know that both of them, due to the limited time, will not be able to tell us even half of that what would be appropriate to characterize his outstanding lifelong achievements. So please, Allan, it's your floor.
Thank you, Professor Märk. In your remarks, you anticipated a good deal of what I was about to say, and I don't see any sense in repeating this except to emphasize how thoroughly Brian McGuinness has done what he has done. He has been working now for 60 years, trying to deal with a philosopher who, despite enormous amounts of research energy throughout the world, often seems no less difficult today than then. But we've learned that there are a lot of paths we shouldn't go up, and Brian McGuinness has shown us a lot about that too. He's shown us how to appreciate Wittgenstein's words in his translation of the Tractatus, in his editions of the Proto-Tractatus, numerous letters from Wittgenstein's most important interlocutors, Paul Engelmann, Bertrand Russell, John Maynard Keynes, G.E. Moore, and other Cambridge acquaintances, in particular Frank Ramsey and Piero Sraffa, as well as in his extensive correspondence with his family. Once upon a time, I can remember Dr. Thomas Stoneborough of Vienna, the son of Wittgenstein's sister Margaret, saying, Brian McGuinness knows more about our family than we do. And I think that remains true. He's covered all in his own essays and in his book Approaches to Wittgenstein. He's covered the main points of discussion in ways that no scholar can possibly ignore. With regard to his biography of the young Wittgenstein, taking Wittgenstein from his birth in 1889 until the publication of the Tractatus in 1922, he has produced a work which now has been on the market for nearly 30 years, remains unsurpassed. It happens to be a book that I use in my own research continually. Every time I go back to it, I realize that it's better than I thought it was, and that if I had read it more carefully the last time, I wouldn't have to be writing what I'm writing now. As the Rettore has already mentioned, he has edited not only Wittgenstein's philosophical environment, philosophical friends. He's edited the people who influenced Wittgenstein. He's edited the members works of many members of the Vienna Circle, with whom Wittgenstein's always been identified in a somewhat problematic way. It's not a simple relationship. And the text that he's edited have helped us to understand these complications. And he's done that in a series published by Boston University, the Boston University Center for the Philosophy and History of Science. Again, one of the institutions that brought Brian McGuinness and me together. He in this distinguished position as editor, I in a lowly position as a research associate. But I mean, our paths have been crossing for a very long time before we finally became colleagues in Innsbruck 20 years ago. We first met as I was beginning my doctoral studies and was in Vienna for the first time nearly 50 years ago, in 1969. We met in a cafe house in Vienna to introduce ourselves to each other. It was a very different world then. The Wittgenstein philosophical world was very different then, and people were not so comfortable with one another as they have become over time. And so we began with a quite correct, formal, and collegial relationship to one another that we kept over many, many decades, meeting again, I think, the second time only 8 years later in Kirchberg am Wechsel at Austria's Wittgenstein Symposium, and this was the first big one, which we both attended, along with the creme de la creme of Wittgenstein research. And one of the more memorable aspects of that was that our host, Adolf Hübner, was a veterinarian who had a wonderful fish pond. And he had a little restaurant there to which he could invite a small group of under 20 people, sort of the guests of honor. And there was a dinner for the guests of honor at that meeting, at which there were several tables, and then there was a little table that was sort of like a children's table. And I can remember sitting at that table was Anthony Kenny, now Lord Kenny, Christopher Neary from Budapest, Brian McGuinness, and myself. So in those days, it was the children's table. So it's a very long time ago. Well, as I said, Brian McGuinness has had a long-standing relationship with Innsbruck and Innsbruck University going back into the 60s, actually longer than my own. And when he came to Innsbruck to meet Ludwig von Vicher, for whom for whose papers the Brenner Archive was founded, as a part of his research on the Tractatus and the background of it, he got to know Walter Mettlagel very, very early, and was in regular contact with us more or less throughout the 80s. We were very, very happy. We were very, very happy. In 1997, 20 years ago, when we sponsored a symposium on Wittgenstein's Intimus, Paul Engelmann and Brian McGuinness came, and became clear that there was mutual interest in collaboration, which has been going on with increasing intensity up till today. And the most important piece of single research that came out of decades of research into Wittgenstein at the Brenner Archive is the addition of of Wittgenstein's complete correspondence with complete tables and commentary, etc., of which we have the honor of having one Brian McGuinness to be an editor. And we've been very proud of this collaboration, and it has been really, he has helped to lay the basis for Wittgenstein research, which will go on thanks to the efforts of Professor Mitterer and the acquisition of the McGuinness papers on Wittgenstein, which is, I think, the best collection and certainly the best organized any place. So all of this has made me very happy over the years. It's made me even more happy to as in the course of all of this, our relationship has become really one of warmth and friendship. I mean, over the years now, I think we have met in all the big cities in Europe, certainly in Vienna many times. In Kirchberg, it's not such a big city, but a place where lots of things having to do with Wittgenstein take place on a number of occasions. In Paris, on a number of occasions. In Oxford, in 1979. And that meeting I have to tell you about because it was an unforgettable meeting. It was in the summer, and so there was no high table. There was no fancy meal. Brian nevertheless invited me to have lunch with him, and this lunch was, in many respects, an unforgettable event. it began in some rather small room with a small number of people, I don't know, probably under 20 anyway. As we sat down, Brian began by apologizing for the quality of the food, which I hadn't noticed to be particularly terrible, but he apologized extensively about this. And then a conversation began, which suddenly went off into ancient Greek, which sort of left me as an American with very weak Greek, such as it is, trying to figure out what I was doing there. Then the conversation turned to Boston University, where we were with whom we've both been associated, and we talked about the two people who ran the colloquium for philosophy and history of science, Robert Cohen and Mark Zwartowski. And I can remember Brian saying, imagine being named after Karl Marx. If he'd have been born 5 years later, he'd have been called Stalin. Well, I told Mark Zwartowski about this about 4 or 5 months later, and he said, that's absolutely right. But the pièce de la résistance came with dessert, because Brian was still complaining about the food and apologizing to me for the food. But he said, the dessert, you're going to love the dessert. You're going to love these strawberries. See, and he took me over to a big bowl of fruit. These strawberries are the best strawberries you're ever going to have. These strawberries were picked this morning. They're perfectly fresh. And he went on talking to me about the strawberries. And then suddenly said, well, actually, they're raspberries, which I could see from the beginning. So it's as close as I ever got to Monty Python. Thank you, Brian, for that. No, to sum this all up, I am personally very deeply honored to be able to thank you for what you have done for Wittgenstein studies, for what you have done for the University of Innsbruck, and for all the pleasant, very, very pleasant hours that we've spent together over the last 50 years. Brian, congratulations on your degree, and let me also add congratulations on your 90th birthday.
Magnifico Rettore Märk, magnifico Rettore Frati, chiarissime professoresse, chiarissimi professori, gentili signore e gentili signori, gentilissimo Brian. My relation to Brian McGuinness is the respectful relation of a younger colleague, and many, many years back, the relation of an admiring student who met Brian at the University of Graz, where I was studying, and where he later became an honorary professor in 1988. The achievements of Brian McGuinness have been praised so often and by so many that it is not easy to say something new, to find new praise which has not been offered already by someone else. I will leave out, to shorten the redundancies, the basic dates. I may mention that he has taught as a guest professor at the universities like Stanford, Princeton, Beijing, Leiden, Nijmegen, and in Graz. And he has authored and edited more than 30 books. They include a new translation of the Tractatus, the edition and translation of the Proto-Tractatus, both together with David Pierce, and together with Joachim Schulte, he published the definite edition of the Tractatus, one of the most influential books of the 20th century. It is safe to say that nobody in academia has done nearly as much for the recognition in Wittgenstein in particular, and Austrian philosophy in general, than Brian McGuinness has done in the course of 60 years of writing and lecturing. The academic world is inhabited by a variety of species. One of them is the very rare species of the geniuses, who publish very little in their lifetime, but write notebooks and journals and zettels full of ideas. today perhaps even hard disks and whatever, which are then left to hard-working academics who clear up the mess they leave behind and then edit collected works who establish the fame and influence of those thinkers. Where would Wittgenstein's place in philosophy be today without Brian McGuinness's hard work, without Van Richt or Anscombe, or to begin with Russell, Ogden, and Ramsey? What status would Friedrich Waismann and other Austrian philosophers of the Vienna Circle have without the tireless editorial work of Brian McGuinness spanning more than 6 decades? He edited, and let's emphasize, these editions were not the usual editions of proceedings with papers hardly anybody ever reads. He edited the works of Friedrich Waismann, Otto Neurath, Hans Hahn, Ernst Mach, Frege Schächter, and so on, and of course Ludwig Wittgenstein. And add to these volumes a large number of articles and problems and issues related to these authors. Mentioned before has been already Wittgenstein, alive, young Ludwig, so I only just mentioned 2 or 3 relations. Most of these people have passed away already. Alfred Ayer, the great philosopher, said his account of the mutual impact of Wittgenstein and his Cambridge friends and mentors, particularly Russell, is uniformly brilliant. McGuinness's book is indispensable reading. Or Michael Dummett, who has become as well a friend of Brian, he wrote, "The first life of the philosopher to be worthy of its subject. It must have been an intensely difficult task, which has been magnificently accomplished." Galen Strawson wrote, "Outstanding. Anthony Storr will obviously become the standard biography in English." It has become that. A vivid picture of an extraordinarily interesting human being. Simon Blackburn, who is still a very well-known philosopher today, wrote, "This is a fantastic, young Ludwig is a fantastic account of Wittgenstein's life and also provides one of the best introductions to the ideas and the style of the Tractatus." Brian McGuinness has transferred his complete scientific papers and research materials to the Brenner Archive at the University of Innsbruck. This is by any standard a scientific treasure. Like no one else, Brian McGuinness has searched for documents and other materials on the life and work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the most extensive collection there must be, and these papers include an enormous amount of correspondence between Brian and friends and family of Wittgenstein. Just one example may be the voluminous correspondence with the eminent Chinese philosopher Chia Hung, who did his PhD with Moritz Schlick in Vienna. There is no doubt that his Vorlass, his research papers, will provide the basis for future research projects and editions. I've spoken to philosophers from Britain, Germany, and the United States who already plan to come to Innsbruck to inspect the materials of Brian McGuinness on Wittgenstein and the Vienna Circle. Now, there are friends and collaborators of Brian McGuinness who could not join us today, but some of them have sent short messages. And these friends are much younger than Brian, and this should be a strong indication that his achievements will continue to have an impact on the academic research and discourse. I start with the message of Antonia Soulès, a philosophy professor from Paris. "Dear Brian, you have introduced me into the philosophy of Wittgenstein in such a way to understand more than just a philosophy to read. You have helped me to dig out all the best reasons to make a life with discovering step by step the depths of a magnificent thinker that has illuminated my work in its relation to the arts with its musical ramifications. You have been a rencontre in the strong, vital intellectual sense." Alois Pichler from the Wittgenstein Archive in Bergen, Norway, writes, "Dear Brian, about 15 years ago you said something which I didn't really understand then. You suggested about our Bergen electronic edition that it was an edition for the use of other editors. It took me some years to see that you were, as always, completely clear-sighted and right. Our editorial work in editions mark only new beginnings and not an end to Wittgenstein editing. We at the Bergen Archives are extremely obliged to you for all the comments, help, corrections and guidance we have received from you. Tusen tak, Brian, och gratulerer mit dagen. That's Norwegian. We know what it is. Radmila Schweitzer from the Wittgenstein Initiative in Vienna writes, Dear Brian, Brian is on the board of the Wittgenstein Initiative, and so is Allan Janik. Dear Brian, it is an honor and a privilege to know you and to work with you, and an enormous pleasure to witness your immense culture and sense of humor. Thank you for everything. Herzliche Grüße, Radmila Schweitzer. The director of the Vienna Circle Archive, Friedrich Stadler, sends his best wishes and congratulations to the pioneer of Wittgenstein research. And he writes, Brian McGuinness is one of the most renowned scholars in contemporary philosophy. His expertise on Ludwig Wittgenstein and the Vienna Circle is a unique and enduring contribution to the scientific community and to intellectual life. Toni Unterkircher from the Brenner Archive writes, Dear Brian, I have had the honor to work with you on the first edition of the electronic edition of the Gesamtbriefwechsel, of the collected correspondence of Wittgenstein, of the complete correspondence of Wittgenstein. Through working on and archiving your scientific papers of your Vorlass, I am only now starting to understand how you have become, through your tireless research of 60 years, the most eminent researcher of the life and work of Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Joseph Wang from the Brenner Archive, who yesterday had his successful PhD defense, he writes, Dear Brian, as a young student, I have had the privilege to work with you and Allan. From Allan, I got to know the beauty of ideas, and from you, the true meaning of wisdom. Thank you very, very much, and congratulations, Joseph. There are more personal wishes from Innsbruck, which I'm happy to relate, from Walter Mettlagel, the founder and first director of the Brenner Archive, from Johannes Holzner, the former director of the Brenner Archive, of course as well from Ilse Sommerwiller and from Michael Schorner, both from the Brenner Archive. Then I may add from Volker Munz in Klagenfurt. These are all those who have talked to you, and I'm sure many others would join in. There is one more congratulant whom I want to mention. He is the brother of a former au pair of the McGuinness family. His name, I spoke to him this week, is Christoph Kardinal Schönborn from Vienna, who sends his very best wishes and congratulations to your birthday and to the honorary doctorate. His longtime friend, collaborator, co-editor and translator, Professor Joachim Schulte, who is here today, wrote that the electronic edition of Wittgenstein's Gesamtbriefwechsel is an indispensable tool of each and every Wittgenstein researcher, just as much as the collection of letters and documents Wittgenstein in Cambridge. And, continues Schulte, his research still forms the starting basis of any scientific discussion of Wittgenstein. Some 25 years ago, Joachim Schulte published together with Göran Sundholm a Festschrift for Brian McGuinness, named Crisscrossing a Philosophical Landscape, where they expressed the hope that the community of scholars shall long be able to benefit from Brian McGuinness's learning and industry. And indeed, there is yet a new project Brian McGuinness is working on right now, a new, revised and expanded edition of the Wittgenstein family letters, forthcoming in English and German editions early next year or even the end of this year. And again, it will be as painstakingly careful edited as any other book he published. And like every other book Brian has edited, he is working with all the scrutiny, preciseness and style which are characteristic for all his works. The University of Innsbruck honors with Brian McGuinness one of the outstanding academic philosophers of our times, an honor it bestows upon him, which is as well an honor for the university itself. Brian, the University of Innsbruck, which is going to celebrate its 350 years anniversary very soon, is now your alma mater. Congratulations.
Janik, Josef Mitterer, thank you very much for your enthusiastic, convincing, and impressive laudationes. I think once again they have shown that the decision made by the Rectorate is more than substantiated, and thus we will now start with the official ceremony of the conferment of the Honorary Doctorate of Philosophy to Professor Brian McGuinness. I have to announce publicly that the Rectorate, together with the Advisory Board, has met on July 7th, 2017, and has decided that Professor Brian McGuinness will receive the Honorary Doctorate of Philosophy degree for outstanding scholarly achievements. In order to proceed now with the ceremony, I asked the Dean for Promotion, Sebastian Donat, and the Promotrix, Ulrike Danzer, to join me, and we will now proceed. And I would like now to ask Professor Brian McGuinness to raise himself, and please, Dean, start.
Illustrissime Domine Professor Brian McGuinness, Rectoribus Universitatis Leopoldino Francisci Unipontani placuit te dignitate Doctoris Philosophiae honoris causa ornari. Dear Professor Brian McGuinness, the Rectorate of the Leopold Franzens Universität Innsbruck has decided to confer upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Brian McGuinness, das Doktorat der Leopold-Franzens-Universität Innsbruck hat beschlossen, Ihnen das Ehrendoktorat der Philosophie zu verleihen.
Illustrissime Domine Professor Brian McGuinness, Decanus Facultatis Eorum qui Philologiam colunt et mores hominum perscrutantur. Paulo ante testatus est et sagittate et doctrina excellentum dignum esse, qui titolo Doctoris Philosophiae honoris causa orneris. Qua de causa pomotricem rogo ut de Doctorem Philosophiae honoris causa renunciat. Dear Professor McGuinness, the Dean of the Faculty of Languages, Literature and Culture hereby just has publicly attested and certified that in light of your exemplary scholarly accomplishments and achievements, you are worthy of receiving the honorary degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Therefore, I ask the duly appointed issuing officer, Promotrix, to confer upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Brian McGuinness, der Dekan der Philologisch-Kulturwissenschaftlichen Fakultät hat soeben öffentlich bezeugt, dass Sie aufgrund hervorragender wissenschaftlicher Leistungen würdig sind, mit dem Ehrendoktorat der Philosophie ausgezeichnet zu werden. Ich bitte daher die Frau Promotorin, Ihnen den Titel eines Ehrendoktors der Philosophie der Universität Innsbruck zu verleihen. Bitte.
Illustrissime Domine Professor Brian McGuinness, Maxima sagacitate atque doctrina excellens dignus nobis videris, qui titulo Doctoris honoris causa oneris. Quam ob rem nomine facultatis eorum, qui philologiam colunt et mores hominum perscrutantur, nec non nomine Universitatis Leopoldino Franciscae Unipontane Rectorum decoram publico dignitate doctoris philosophiae honoris causa orno. Dear Professor Brian McGuinness, due to your outstanding scholarly accomplishments and achievements, you have proven yourself worthy of receiving this honorary doctoral degree. Therefore, on behalf of the Faculty of Language, Literature and Culture and of the Rectorate of the Leopold Franzens Universität Innsbruck, I publicly confer upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Brian McGuinness, aufgrund Ihrer hervorragenden wissenschaftlichen Leistungen haben Sie sich des Ehrendoktorates würdig erwiesen. Ich verleihe Ihnen daher öffentlich im Namen der Philologisch-Kulturwissenschaftlichen Fakultät und des Rektorats der Leopold Franzens Universität Innsbruck das Ehrendoktorat der Philosophie.
That's all right. Oh, they're useful. Well, you'll have seen that there's a lecture advertised. It'll be a lecture a non leggendo, so to speak, because I haven't anything to read from or about or to you. And really, of course, I don't want to give you instruction even on the subject of Wittgenstein, though I've spent a lot of time on that in my life. But I have to say how grateful I am to, of course, in the first place, the University of Innsbruck and the Rectorate, and then also to the University of Siena, which is represented here, and also to all you friends and dear family that have also come. Now, the nice words have been said about me. Those nice words really are congratulations to me on having been able to spend my life doing exactly what I wanted to do from the first. I did it in this form, of course, of concentrating rather on one philosopher. In that way, I naturally came to know more about him than the average person would know. But I would say, enjoyed every minute of it, but every other minute of it I certainly have enjoyed. It probably brought me to Innsbruck first, I think, on this very day. No, not in this day, but shortly after, in November 1965, when I took up from Vienna, where in those days there was a night train, as I remember, that one had a sleeper for the night. And I was brought up by a figure that some of you will know of, the Innsbruckers perhaps more than others, of Ignaz Zangerle. I was brought up in order to go and see Ludwig von Vicker, of whom we've spoken. You can imagine, well, perhaps you can imagine what he was like. A distinguished man of great culture, and by that time of great age also. And he had known Wittgenstein before the First War. And that was perhaps the earliest contact, so to speak, with friends of Wittgenstein that I had. He's somebody who had been very important to Wittgenstein at that time and was an inspiration, I think, making him see a certain aspect of his philosophy, the aspect of his philosophy that related it to life in general, to religion, to culture. This side of philosophy and of logic was not so clear to Wittgenstein, I'm sure, before he came across Vicker, and then in the course of the First War, people as it happened in Moravia, because that's where he was serving in the army. And some of these I also met on that occasion. It was really a journey into the past for me, and I came out of it with access to manuscripts and in some cases to shorthand manuscripts, which took some deciphering. In fact, I had to go to Zurich and see a wonderful professor wonderful professor of shorthand who could read easily the particular form of Gabelsberger shorthand that Friedrich Weissmann used. And I was able, from these, to reconstitute, fortunately, conversations which Wittgenstein had with Weissmann and Schlick, which were part of the origin of the so-called Vienna Circle. There were also there, in Vienna at that time, survivors from that circle. They weren't a central part of the university anymore. In fact, I think philosophy in general in Austria was rather hostile to that kind of philosophy, official philosophy in Vienna particularly. Perhaps out there in Graz, which I went to later, there was more interest in this scientific approach to philosophy, which Moritz Schlick and so on had introduced in Vienna in the 1930s. Anyway, that was my first visit to Innsbruck, when I met vicar, a very worthy, admirable man. His life obviously darkened to some extent by a life in which there were patches of darkness. There, almost as the son of the house, was Walter Mettlagel, who later became, I think he's right to say, he was director of the Brenner Archive, which was then set up. Brenner was the name of the periodical that Vicar published, edited. And, of course, it symbolizes a bridge, I suppose, a bridge between Germany and Italy, which was very suitable for me as my later life turned out, because I became very interested in both places. Fortunately, it was quite easy to do this at Oxford, because we were very well supplied with, I'm afraid this was partly the fault of Mr. Hitler, but we were very well supplied with the emigration, with scholars from these places. And in particular, I was able to, when I wanted to know something specifically about Austria, das spezifisch Österreichische, I had the help. I even went for tutorials to Amy Wellis, wife of Egon Wellis, a friend of Schoenberg. Anyway, I learned very much about, I thought I learned a lot about the specific Austrian culture from her. In those years, I had already conceived an interest in Italy. People came from Italy in those years, the 1950s, earlier years, when I think life recovered in Italy very remarkably recovered after the war, and part of that intellectual stimulus they came and brought to us. And we had many visitors from there. But I remember two in particular, and they were two particular, I must say, the most candid spirits probably that I've known in my life. There was Giancarlo Colombo, a priest who was the first translator of Wittgenstein into Italian, who unfortunately died young. And then the other, known to some of us, was Giorgio Gargani, who was spared to us for longer, though not as long as we would have wished. But through him, I then later was brought into contact with Italian philosophers and led, I can say they were led by Rosaria Egidi, who's here with us tonight. I came and took part in, study groups together with them, and these eventually led under the, I must always myself regard it as wise guidance of Rector Berlinguer, brought me actually to Siena, where I passed many, many happy years. I seem to have known, you probably won't recognize that my name, McGuinness, Maganisa it's called in Irish, it really means son of Aeneas, and Ascanio, son of Aeneas. And indeed I have felt like Aeneas, for better and worse. I've always felt the pull of Italy, as it were, when he was there in the ships trying to go, even falling in love with people. He nonetheless felt I ought to be going to Italy. Said, and I'll give it to you in Latin, since we have heard some Latin today. He said, per varios casus, per tot discriminarerum, tendimus in Latium, sedes ubi fata quietas ostendunt. Well, and certainly they have done that for me, and I found here, obviously, my dear wife, I found colleagues, friends, my family were here. Many of them have contact with Italy too. Some of them were even born here. And so, I can say, I think, that I've had those quiet years, though I obviously hope they won't end too soon. I've had many of them. Well, having said that, I must thank really my laudatories for, I'm sorry to say they did exaggerate, but they were very kind about me. And I've been kindly judged also, obviously, by your committees. I look forward to further collaboration with the Brenner Archive. And, well, it'll have to be done by, fortunately, it can be done now by email. I'll be glad to say now, that future generations will be able to build on our work, and we've done our bit. And with that, I think I've finished. Dixie, as they. Thank you.
A moment. With these very kind words of an Englishman about culture and philosophy in Austria and how it all started, this ceremony gets to an end. Before we now come to the next point, which will be the dinner, and you're all invited now very cordially to a dinner in honor of Brian McGuinness and today's honorary ceremony. I would like to thank the musicians who have played so wonderfully and will also now play a final piece for us. I would also like to thank all the people who have been involved in preparing this ceremony, and there have been a lot of people. And I would also like to thank you very much, all of you, for attending this ceremony, because that has set the right reference frame. And I would also like to thank Professor McGuinness for a very important work she has done for us, because she has made all the dinner plates, the dinner name plates, yeah, and so you always find the right place for the next point now in this ceremony. So we will have the last piece and we will move out, and then you will follow us to the dinner. Thank you very much.